And we are live. This is Ryan Munn on Interchain Live with a special guest, Amit Guruprasad with Devon MedTech Solutions and Renaissance Ecosystem. I lost it again. Say it again, Amit.
Renaissance Quality Ecosystems.
Renaissance Quality Ecosystems. Talking about MedTech technology development, specifically, Amit has a background in FDA consulting, helping companies get through FDA pre-submissions and work their products through that process. So Amit, let's go back a little bit. Give me a little bit of background on kind of how you came into doing this as a consultant.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Definitely appreciate being on different types of podcasts, and I love your perspective on a lot of different things, including healthcare, blockchain, and you have a very diverse experience, so that's why we mesh pretty well. But yeah, let me give you a background about myself in terms of like how I kind of came to be, just in terms of starting Devon MedTech Solutions and then starting a service as a software company called Renaissance Quality Ecosystems, and it really started 2 years ago. So I've been in the MedTech, med device space for well over a decade. And, my background's in biomedical engineering. I also have a master's as well. Didn't do too much for me, honestly. There's just a couple of pieces of paper my parents paid for. And I just had to leverage it, right? That paper is different from the paper that I'm looking for right now.
Yeah, I hear you.
One's more valuable than the other these days, as you know.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of folks that are looking to get sort of out of the grind, if you will, right? Like the college grind into the 9 to 5 grind, tend to look for a more entrepreneurial path, right? And if you are an entrepreneurial thinker, you tend to find those opportunities wherever you're at. So over the past couple of years, it sounds like, from our conversations, you've been through sort of the ups and downs of entrepreneurship and done a lot of the grunt work yourself, like a lot of the hard, like get it done, work through the details, help companies really figure it out. But a lot of it's manual. And now we're coming to this age where there's all these advanced tools, automation capabilities, but it's a Lego box, right? Like it's a lot of things that need to be put together, and then they still need to be tweaked and refined and supported by someone that really understands the process and can guide those tools to something with positive results. So so that's kind of, from my understanding, where it's gone from Devon MedTech Solutions Consulting to Renaissance Quality Ecosystems. So tell me a little bit about that transition that you've gone through.
Yeah. So when I started the consultancy, which is an LLC, everything I was doing was manual. So let's say Ryan, hits me up on LinkedIn, sends messages to me saying, "Hey, look, I like your background. I have this cool product. It could be an imaging system. It could be a catheter. It could be a diagnostic." You have no idea where to start, right? So you come to someone like me who knows the process, who's interfaced with the FDA, more than a handful of times. I can't even count how many times now, right? But the point is that the process is very powerful because it's not just a process; it's an art. Especially with a lot of these kind of the way, semantics and the way you phrase words, the way you phrase questions. So that was all manually done when it comes to 510Ks, which is a type of regulatory submission. When it comes to pre-submissions, which is a way to really mitigate the risk of your project, whether it's a class 1, class 2, or class 3 medical device within the United States, right? So you just want to get insights from the FDA to really inject into your design and development plan to get to that point of safety and efficacy, whether it's a clearance or an approval or granted a de novo, which is another type of pathway as well, right? There's a variety of different pathways. So I did everything like manually, right? In terms of writing, in terms of really organizing my thoughts, or organizing my feelings, understanding what the intended use of a product is. Ryan comes to me. Ryan knows where his vision is, but I help Ryan as a founder of a biotech company, a medtech company, or whatever life sciences company, really formulate his thoughts, right? How do you want to really present this to the agency, right? Because that's risk. So the risk is actually contingent upon what you're saying. Is this a diagnostic tool? You're measuring XYZ things. Great. You're measuring my blood pressure. But are you going to use that blood pressure data to make a correlation to something that's a diagnostic tool, saying heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's? It doesn't matter, right? Something's correlated to something, but as soon as you make that correlation, your risk goes up. That means you need to provide clinical data to the FDA or a clinical study or a clinical trial, which is there's a big difference. Are you measuring health outcomes? Or are you just collecting data, right? So these semantics, these definitions are super important, because that'll dictate the risk of your project for the next 5 to 10 years. And that's more than $1 million. I'll tell you that, maybe tens of millions of dollars. So you want to really mitigate the risk of this by interfacing with the FDA at a very early stage and kind of putting your cards out on the table. So that's all done manually. Well, how did I transition into, Renaissance, right? Well, I would say like a lot of these things can be automated, right? A lot of the information that I utilize is public information. I'm not scraping data from random sites. I'm scraping data from the FDA websites, which is what I do manually anyway, right? So pretty much that's the most accurate place you can get it. And I don't go anywhere else. I don't go to the black markets to find FDA data. I go to the FDA website. It's right in front of you. You can do it. My 10-year-old niece can do it. My 72-year-old dad can do it. Okay. Yeah. So that means the software that I have, that means both of those people can play around with it. It's so intuitive where you can actually create these smart templates and input all that information that you do manually in an automated sense and get that information out, I would say, very quickly. So let's say like you spend 50 hours, 100 hours on a pre-sub, the software will take care of 80% of the work. But Ryan, let's say Ryan's a consultant or Amit's a consultant, Ryan and Amit at this point, well, Amit's a consultant in this context, I still am there 20% of the time to hold your hand, Ryan. So the point is that like I'm not letting you to submit that information with AI. I don't trust AI that much at this point in my life, I would say, but I would trust it 80% of the time, and I'll review it 20%. So, and then we'll get it done together and we'll submit it, and then we get a meeting with the FDA about 6 to 8 weeks after we submit this pre-submission. We ask these questions, we get these insights, and then we inject it into Ryan's design and development plan for his classification of medical device or product.
Got it. So now companies coming to you, they've already potentially invested quite a bit in developing their idea, their device or their service or their product, whatever it is. So they've got a sunk cost already most of the time, but sometimes people might come to you with just the idea, understanding that they want to get ahead of this process in order to get that pre-sub approval to maybe attract investors, right? So it can kind of come from different areas of development depending on what the backing is of the company coming to you, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, and you probably know this better than I do. All ideas are shit, right? So that's I can have the coolest ideas too. I can make these glasses tomorrow, and maybe Ryan is blind and Ryan can see tomorrow, right? But there's so much that goes into this work, right? An idea is great. It's a really cool idea. Ryan's blind. Ryan's not blind tomorrow, right? So the point is that who's paying for this?
Right.
Insurance, right? The reimbursement codes that we spoke about some time ago, you're asking. So there's a difference between reimbursement codes and product codes, right? Reimbursement codes are more associated with like CMS, Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, in terms of saying, well, how is this product or service or whatever it may be in terms of the healthcare system being reimbursed by XYZ entity, right? Yeah. That's very important. So, a lot of people, can I even afford this out of pocket? As you know, even the upper middle class can't, man. Think about it. If you don't have insurance, paying out of pocket, you will get murdered. Oh, yeah. Sorry, maybe that's a bad term to use with health insurance, but guess what? Yeah, you get murdered, right?
Yeah, you get murdered. There's worse terms you can use, but we won't go there.
yeah. Well, you get murdered financially is my point. Yeah, right? That's the point. And like, I don't advocate for debt and all these things, but the point is that the system's broken, and we can fix that in different ways with really automating a lot of these processes and getting the products to the right places, right? And that's the USA. The infrastructure is so good. But what about India, where there's 1.4 billion people, and I think the ratio of doctor to patients is like 1 doctor to every 1,500 patients. Think about it.
Wow.
Can you see 1,500 patients in one day or even 1 week? Probably not. Especially if you want to personalize the medicine. So the thing is that I like thinking about different markets and ecosystems and really understanding what the pain points are, because you can't take the blueprint from the US and just embed it into India and vice versa. It's impossible.
Right. Now, does India have a similar, like the FDA, like they have a similar process, or is it a very different process?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar in a lot of ways. I mean, it's called CDSCO. That's like the Indian FDA. And right now, there's a standard in the market. It's a quality management standard. It's called ISO 13485, which is 1345 version 2016. So this is kind of like the universal standard for like quality management, systems for medical devices and medical technology. What are your processes, the principles you're using? How are you setting up the structure, the trainings, the documents, the version control, et cetera? A to Z, your design history, your risk, your clinical, XYZ things. It doesn't matter. What is the structure for that? And what's going to be happening, not only in the US, is that the US is transitioning to that ISO 1345 realm now. Before it was their own regulation called 21 CFR 820. But they have a grace period until, I would say, they, meaning any manufacturer in the US, has a 2-year grace period that ends in Feb 2026. So as a consultant, I know I'm going to be busy towards the end of this year. You know why? Because all these manufacturers wait the last minute, and they're like, "Oh, we need someone to audit our systems. We need a certificate." So what I tell them is like, plan it out now. It's February. Right. Plan it out now, because once February 2026 comes, it's a 1 year later. Look, you want to be very, very well ahead of the game. 1 year is not a long time, as we know. So be 10 steps ahead is my point.
Yeah, right on. And that's where these tools come into play, right? As you start automating this so that you can take on more clients, so that you can empower your clients to start getting through this process, that's where it really becomes important, right? Because how could they possibly handle this load if we don't start putting some tools in place to automate that process and streamline the interaction between what they have, what information gets gathered, and working with someone like yourself to help guide that process so that those submissions and certifications are successful.
Yeah. Like I said, it's more of an art than a science, right? Especially interfacing with the FDA. It's like having a lawyer in front of you and from a courtroom. Would you go and represent yourself? No, unless you're Mike Ross from Suits, who has a photographic memory, then fine. But you also got Harvey Specter sitting right behind him. So you don't want to mess with those guys, right?
Right.
So the point is that, like, same thing with the FDA. You'd have the right representation. Like, look, the FDA, they embrace innovation, okay? They're not the cops. They're not the cops. People think, oh, they see the FDA, it's a red flag. Well, that's just perspective. Don't be offended by the FDA. They're actually good people there, right? And the big part, what manufacturers should be scared of is the liability attorneys that will come sue you if something would go wrong. The FDA won't do that. They'll come shut you down. They won't sue you, but the people that you hurt, like, for example, Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, she hurt a lot of people. Liability attorneys were all over her, as they should be, because she made a humongous mistake, and now she's paying for it. Now she's in jail, as you know. But the point is that that's the worst of the worst scenario, right? These things happen, and I know these things that happen too. People say, "Oh, founders don't cut corners." Yes, founders do cut corners because they're trying to get to the next funding milestone. But guess what happens, Ryan? You get to that funding milestone, you get this clearance, and then someone gets hurt, and guess what happens? You go back to square one, or you're out of the game. 3 strikes, you're out, right? You're on the bench.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit beyond that. Maybe beyond the locker room too sometimes.
Right.
So it's people have to be super careful on like how you approach the FDA and ask the right questions, right? The right questions will get you the right answers. Open-ended questions will leave you with a can of worms, and you don't want that.
Right. Now, I would imagine, like you said, kind of all ideas are shit, right? But part of the way the good stuff comes out is through the process, right? Through iteration, through development and application. But I would imagine there's a lot of companies, people that have ideas, have products that are kind of similar. And in some ways, it's good. We want that competition. But in other ways, there can be a lot of wasted time and energy by not recognizing making the same mistake over and over again, or picking up on the thing that works right and applying that to your product. So where do you see opportunity to sort of mitigate that loss and really maximize the opportunity for collaboration, even among competitors in the industry?
Yeah, like I think blockchain is a big part of that, right? You've kind of been in the space for quite some time, and I think there's a lot of value to blockchain, not only in terms of like being transparent and having like this immutable ledger and kind of seeing what's going on, but the applications are endless, Ryan. And it's one of these things where this is why I named my company Renaissance Quality Ecosystems, right? Which is pretty much having a healthy competition between people who are competitors. So let's say me, you, and 3 other people are in the same space. Let's say we all focus on embolic coils for cerebral aneurysms. Random. I used to work in this industry, and I have a lot of friends who work in the neurovascular space. So I like that area, and it's very cool, and there's a lot of life-saving technologies out there. But let's say we got 5 of the same companies doing the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Compliance is key, right? Compliance is key. Compliance, it should not be a checkbox. But why can't we motivate people, or why can't we incentivize people to keep a compliance rate at a certain threshold, whatever it is, 80%, 90%. But the point is that compliance level will increase based off the risk of your product, right? So if you have something going into your brain, it's a pretty high risk product, right? So you better have a pretty high compliance rate. If you have a COVID test, look, the risk is still there, but it's not as something going into your body in terms of like staying there, like an implant or taking like a something out of your body as well. So the risk will kind of dictate the compliance level in terms of the ecosystems. And, maybe you can touch upon this too, in terms of like, how would you kind of create certain ecosystems with like DAOs, for example, DAOs, and like, maybe you can touch upon that. And like, how do you incentivize these companies saying, look, this is a token that's going to keep increasing in value because your compliance rate is at 85, 90% for this risk. But I would say like, the top 3 people who are 1 through 3 in terms of rank, they will be benefited in terms of some monetary value because they're the league leaders or something like that, right? But the point is that, like, what do you think about that? And like, how do you see like this being implemented, not only in like my vision, but like all of healthcare or other examples that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the incentive models are broad and complex, and one of the challenges that companies are looking at is how do they maintain privacy or provenance of their IP, their intellectual property, right? And so that's where I see opportunities for blockchain to enable that preservation of provenance and enable the ability to sort of selectively share key information that might be involving compliance while keeping other more proprietary information private. And then there's other players in this, right? You mentioned risk, right? How do you address risk? Well, one part of it is compliance. You need that oversight. And that's where having a shared ledger of compliance information can enable oversight to cost less over time, as well as create those mechanisms. What you're referring to, I think, would really be done by insurances to create those incentives to say, hey, this is the cost of insuring, but you get these rebates or you get these kickbacks over time based on the consistency of compliance. And whoever's maybe, contributing the most information to that pool might have additional rewards to say, hey, this is what we're finding are best practices. This is what we're doing in our product and service in order to mitigate these risks, and incentivizing them to share that information instead of it really being all held close to the chest and in silos. It opens that up so that competitors can be competitive in a fair way, right? And also not have the competition beyond, who makes a mistake and kills somebody, right? Let's have the competition beyond, okay, who can, market the product better, or who can serve a different audience, and make it more about how they differentiate value as opposed to, sort of a winner take all or pass fail kind of situation. If it's a matter of, some are going to succeed because they hit all the check boxes versus some of them cut a corner, that's not a market I want to be in as a consumer, right? Like, yeah. I want to make sure that there's no corners being cut by any number of competitors in the ecosystem, and that they're competing in a range of product variation that really differentiates value. And that's a challenge that we're in today in terms of so many products and developments being inside of these silos. And there's also a lot of waste, right? There's a lot of effort duplicated across those ecosystems, where perhaps if they were able to be incentivized to share key information, they could shorten that pathway to market. They can shorten the risk thresholds, right? Make it less risky so that insurance costs less. And that's a huge savings for a big player, but that also makes the market more accessible to a small innovator.
Yeah, exactly. I think it kind of, I guess, evens the playing field in a sense, right? Where kind of everyone's got a shot at actually succeeding without being dominated by one major player, right? Like game theory, right? Game theory naturally is like equilibrium, right? I think we spoke about this some time ago, where it's like, you've seen Beautiful Mind, right? Yeah. Russell Crowe, and like I think that one scene where they're in the bar and the 5 women walk in and they're all just into that one woman, the tall blonde, right?
Right.
But John Nash realizes, look, there's 4 of us, there's 5 of them, but let's see, like, we want girlfriends, they want boyfriends, so let's pick the ones we want, and they all get girlfriends. The community wins, and each one of them singly win too. Obviously, the blonde woman is left out, but that's life, right? Someone's got to be left out. But the point is that they all win. The community wins. Every one of them win too. But that's the beauty of blockchain, right? That is blockchain. Like Bitcoin, for example. Like, look, people are saying, oh, fine, it's rat poison, this, that. But like, look, anything in life is something, that's worth of value, is something what someone else puts a value on, right? I can go to some asteroid, around the Earth's orbit and mine all the gold there, obviously it will happen one day, and bring that here, and then gold will be worthless,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Gold will be worthless. Gold will be like the dollar.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's supply and demand is a key factor there. And that's, that's part of where, we have there's a recent report, I haven't caught up on it. It just came out February 7th from Vermont Futures Project that it basically supposes, we're in a state here where it's really about scarcity versus abundance, right? How do we want to look at things? Do we look at things in terms of scarcity, in terms of winner take all, in terms of healthcare being something that's hard to get for people, and some people have to just settle for less and other people can just pay more to get what they need? Or do we have a situation of abundance where the reality is that we have a ton of knowledge, huge capacity for manufacturing, and a vibrant ecosystem of MedTech development and innovation in pretty much every corner of this country and every corner of the world? And can we not bring that together in more collaborative ways? And a rising tide raises all boats. So, that's, I hope, the promise of blockchain. I think Bitcoin is rat poison to a corrupt financial system. and similarly, I think blockchain and smart contracts are rat poison to a corrupt economic and insurance system in many ways, right? This idea that, one overarching company can basically make the decisions and exclude people from insurance is, it has to be put aside. We have to be able to create inclusive systems and be able to monitor them, not just from some government oversight agency, but our 10-year-old nieces and nephews should be able to pick up a pencil and do the math and look up what's on a ledger and understand what's going on, at least to the extent of knowing, is there corruption at play, or is everything being operated honestly?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I don't think I mentioned this to you, but I may have. I started a blockchain company about 5 years ago on health informatics. So, my dad, he's been through a lot in his, in terms of health, kidney transplant, triple bypass surgery, pacemaker, you name it. He's like Iron Man in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But he's knock on wood, he's still working. He's healthy, and well, a lot of the information that has been kind of recorded about him, it's not his information, right? You go to these hospitals, and he's been, so pretty much a lot of these hospitals, they're benefit off him being sick, right? So it's like, whose information is that? It's not mine. It's not my family's. It's not my dad's. Where is it going? I mean, I'm not gonna say it, but you would know. But the point is that, like, my idea was more, and I created a brief demo of it too. It was like pretty much, it's lock and key, right? Ryan or Amit, we go to the hospital. Well, I want the information to stay with me. So give me my information. And guess what? If you want to buy it, we'll create a healthcare marketplace like Amazon. You want to buy my information, at least earn it by giving you some money. So obviously, God knows how much my dad's medical records are worth, but there's a lot of data there just because of genetics, just because of XYZ things, right? They're all correlative, but he doesn't own it. So he's getting sick, and his information is actually going to someone who's benefiting off him. So he's getting double screwed.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because a lot of this information in a silo on its own isn't worth so much. It's when you aggregate it with a bunch of other information that it starts to become more and more valuable, because it provides that perspective. But then again, it gets caught within a silo, and even a massive information is still a drop in the bucket compared to all the information that's out there across the country, across the world. And I run into this talking to developers, innovators, where on the one side, you've got the ones that are sort of caught behind HIPAA, and they struggle to get the data they need to develop something. And I've seen a company that was early on in the 3D imaging, and they were very instrumental in helping cardiac surgeons plan their surgeries. In the past, they'd have to literally cut somebody open and kind of make the plan on the fly, right? And because they wouldn't really know what they were going to get until they got there. And even if they did scans, the scans were converted into 2D images that they'd have to kind of guess at what was what. But the data from those scans turned into a three-dimensional image that can be manipulated and completely virtualized beforehand, opened a doorway to those surgeons creating their entire surgical plan with a plan A, plan B, plan C before they ever cut the patient open, right? And so that was a huge innovation. But then what was really interesting is that on top of that, as that treasure trove of data was collected, then the surgeons that were participating with these tools were able to give permission for the company that had this data to share it among the other surgeons to do research.
Yeah.
And suddenly this pocket of surgeons that were associated with this company as a tool started producing something like 10 to 15 times as many reports and journal entries, because they had such a wide range of data available to compare their surgical experiences to other doctors' surgical experiences, and just amplified their ability to produce results doing these studies. And that's the opportunity that I see. That company spun out and does its own thing with sharing data, and now it's among a whole bunch of different hospital ecosystems sharing cardiology data so that more research can be done. But to your point, how much of that's really going back to those patients, or how much is clearly going back to benefit the group of patients as a whole? That's a really hard question to answer. And how much of it is just being capitalized on by companies that have access compared with companies that don't have the access. And then on the flip side of all of this is all the data that companies every day, like Google, the devices companies that are all getting customers and, people to hit, okay, I agree. And guess what? There's a whole ton of medical data out there that's not protected by HIPAA. And that's what other companies that are innovating are able to capitalize on. And again, it's good that they can innovate and get access to that data and negotiate access, and trade access to that data and equity in their companies and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's all sort of in this ephemeral space where those of us that data is coming from aren't able to necessarily hold that accountable, aren't able to access the data themselves, right? Like I might have access to the Google Fit data on my phone that has my steps, but it's not so easy for me to access all the biometrics about like my actual gait, the details about how I walk and how I move and all of that. It's not really available to me. And that's where I'd like to see innovation come to fruition, where, like you said, we'd have a wallet of our own. That data goes into our own wallet, and then we authorize access to that from a core trove of data that's ours. And even though that value is built on the group of data, that end user control is really essential, I think, to take a next step in how we treat data, how we value data, and how we value people.
Yeah. Is that? I have a question for you. Is that kind of correlated or similar to like the GDPR in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation? Is there something between those? Is there a bridge between the two?
So yeah, so the GDPR, the way I kind of put it is there's been a lot of data privacy acts that have been passed to sort of provide an overarching data policy. In my opinion, most or all of them have had their teeth removed. So they're sort of, they're good political moves, and they talk about some of the right things. But what's really missing is that personal sovereignty you're talking about having your own data and having access to every little bit of data. Like if I go in to get my x-rays from the local hospital, they literally print it out on a piece of paper. And I'm like, okay, that's nice, but that's not the data, right?
Yes.
The data is a much different piece of information. And so the other piece that's missing from a lot of the data privacy acts is that that right to action, right? The right to actually take a legal action if your data is misused, mishandled, or not secured properly. And that's what's really missing. And then the other piece that's kind of interesting that's a little bit more of a debate, but GDPR talks about the right to be forgotten. And that's interesting. Like, it makes sense that you should be able to tell a company, hey, you've got to expunge your records, but that's a really hard thing to prove too. Like, how do you prove a negative, right? And so that's a really challenging thing, to enforce. And it's also kind of a false reality. Like, can I tell you, you have to forget me? Can you tell me I have to forget you? Like,
Yeah.
that's a realistic thing, but it makes people feel good, right? It makes people feel like they have control because that's written in the law. And so they should be able to do something about it. And there's a bunch of sort of efforts to create compliance around that.
Yeah.
But is it even possible or realistic or enforceable? That's still up for debate.
Yeah. Even on like LinkedIn, there's this there's this automation to it. Pretty much tells you the LinkedIn is telling you that they're scraping your data unless you turn it off. But you don't know about it though.
Right.
You don't know about it. So how do we know? Are you gonna sift through all the settings? Oh, what's this? It's like, no, people don't have time for that. Come on, man.
Right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
how do you know that it's there or not? What do you think about that? Like, what's the paradigm with that? Or is it a paradox? What is it? Like, why is that even not being unveiled in a way where I can see it and say, no, I don't want my data being stolen. I want to be in control. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's been happening since Facebook early on, right? Where they do an update and change the privacy settings, and they go back in and reset them. And, and I think that's these concepts of sovereignty over our data apply across all these different spectrums, from healthcare to government to, your insurance information for your driving insurance. And when we start talking about social media, it's a similar thing, right? Like, as you build a social network, it's kind of disingenuous to think like, oh, that's what's going on online, because they can just kick you off, they can shut you off, and you lose that network. Right. But the concept in sort of the Web 3.0 or the blockchain related solutions is that the individual can build networks and carry that network from one platform to another. And so then that connection is baked into your wallet of data, has your ledger of information. And then if you decide that you're not going to use Facebook anymore, or you don't want to use LinkedIn anymore, and you're going to use a different platform, you're able to go to that other platform and carry your entire network with you. And it doesn't mean you let them access your contact list and invite all your contacts to join a new platform. They may still be on LinkedIn. They may still be on some other platform, but the idea being that they're still following you on whatever platform you're on. You're using that platform to interface in a social world, and they're receiving those interfaces in whatever context they want to receive them in.
Yeah. There's like, it's so hard. There was like this one company that was trying to compete with Google, right? It's called like Neva, I believe, and they shut down. It was a search engine that emphasized protecting searchers' privacy. But taking over Google, it's tough, man. Obviously, obviously they crushed Yahoo. Yahoo had a chance to buy them out. They said, that they're like, no, you guys aren't worth it, and then they got taken over. All right. But the thing is that how hard is it? Like and maybe this kind of correlates to, I would say, like Apple as well. Like, they don't really iterate these days, like the iPhone, and even Mark Zuckerberg is saying, but they don't need to, man. They run the ecosystem, right? I'll still buy the next iPhone. I'll still buy the next iPhone. Whatever, why? Because the seamlessness of the ecosystem, right? The seamlessness. I come into my apartment, everything connects right away. Hey, how's it going? Everything's connected. My earpods, I lose a lot of them. Thanks, Tim Cook. But the point is that he got me, all right? He got me. I am the product. I'm buying your product, and I am the product. So he double got me. Thanks. That's genius, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the conundrum that we're in, right? And it's hard. We need education, right? People generally have to learn either enough knowledge themselves, or they have to learn enough to discern who to trust and what entities, what labels, what verification symbols to trust, to say, okay, this is doing things a certain way, and this is how I want them done, right? And it comes right down to our elected officials, our appointed officials. Like, they need to get educated in these technologies. Blockchain technology is the technology of risk mitigation. It is the technology of governance. And the longer we resist that, the more we're really subject to the power of obscurity and the power of capital control. And I believe in corporeal capitalism, right? It's capitalism on the individual, right? We're all competing. We can all do better or worse than each other at the end of the day. I don't necessarily believe that it's fair that, you know, one company can win all. I think protocols can win, right? Like the internet, you can't really say like there's the internet company, right? Like there's regional companies that provide infrastructure. There's all these cloud service companies that are providing services on the internet, but the internet works on a bunch of standards and protocols. Those standards and protocols won. Those standards and protocols are used all over the world to make the internet work, and they're not companies that are profiting off of their protocol. And that's the same concept that we hopefully can learn to adopt in terms of our own data and our own interface with technology. And then our own personal AI agents can become our search engines.
Yeah.
And then we're not subject to whatever some company's selling us.
Right. Well, what are your thoughts on this though? I'm like you could play devil's advocate in either situation, right? So a lot of people would say like, oh, Facebook, now Meta, they acquired Instagram, they acquired WhatsApp, but Instagram and WhatsApp would not be as big without them. We know this.
Right.
Same thing with YouTube, would not be as big as, because like that. This is why they acquire companies. They know what they're doing. It's a suite of services, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what is the problem with people saying these acquisitions are a monopoly? They have a right to buy someone out. If someone pays me $20 billion for my company, you think I'm going to say no? Well, it depends, right? I could say no, depending on what the value is, what I think it is, right? And obviously, same thing with Bitcoin. You pay 100K, I pay 50. I think it's worth 50, or I think it's worth 150. You think it's worth what it is right now. But that's perspective. So what do you think about like the whole thing with like companies acquiring other companies, and like, why are people so like salty about it? I get it. You're fine, monopolize this, that, but like that is their right to buy something, right? If they want to buy you out, you're going to listen, why not? But what is the issue with that, with people's like thoughts? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I can't explain it necessarily. It's all depends on context, right? If it's already a big dominant company buying up other companies, that's where we start to enter into the realm of monopolies and antitrust. And it's just that, really 100 years ago, it was way more obvious, right? The concept of like steel company buying up all the other steel companies and pushing out the competition, it was obvious. They're a steel company. Now it's way more complex when we talk about Google being a search company, being a software as a service company, and they have competitors. Their competitors are also huge. And at a certain point, is 3 competitors really not a monopoly anyway, right? And just because they're not getting into a room together talking about what they're going to do doesn't mean that they're not all on the same page, right?
They're frenemies.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a really challenging, complex thing to consider in today's age with all this technology, data, all the ways people interface with it. And it's something that, I hope that over time, people can, again, learn to sort of recognize certain standards that they can trust, can learn to advocate for themselves and for standards that sort of break down the silos of obscurity. And that's the key. I think anywhere there's obscurity, there's likely to be exploitation or corruption. If we can break down that obscurity, sure, we can have obscurity for a time. That's how you protect intellectual property and take advantage of it in the market. But over time, those things get released to the general public so that you can have more competition, more innovation. And that's where, I think in some ways we've gone the wrong direction, extending copyright to whatever it is, 80 or 100 years now. And, that seems kind of backwards in an age where everything's accelerating so much and we're producing so much content all the time. It seems silly that we're extending the range of those copyrights. So, yeah, it's not something I claim to have an answer to, but it's definitely something to be watching and observing and for folks to try to learn more about.
Yeah. Like, what do those like mergers and acquisitions kind of tell you about the market, though? Like, if that starts to pick up, what does that mean to you in terms of a trend in the economy?
Well, that's the direction we're going right now, right?
Yeah.
More consolidation, more centralization. And I think the opportunity is in technology itself, in driving, again, these standards, concepts around blockchain and digital ledgers, that can open the doors to provide that transparency. So as these forces centralize, they can be held accountable. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It, it just might mean less profit for somebody at the top, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's about making them work for us, because all a company is a tool, a machine that's working for us. And I think as we evolve technology, that gets even more complex. As technology gets more intelligent, that gets even more complex. And so it's hopefully a never-ending road, frankly, because if there was an end to it, that would be boring.
Yeah. No, great point. But yeah, I agree.
Well, hey, I want to keep it short for our listeners. We don't want to, take it on all day, but I really appreciate you joining me, Amit, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversations, and really appreciate your insight and development and in the MedTech space, and look forward to finding things to work on together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Ryan, and appreciate the invite.
Awesome.
Take it easy.
Take care.